a blended affair, on the air right now. Here's your host, Michelle Meow.
Welcome back to Swirl, your A through Z covering the LGBT, LMNOP, and everyone in between show. I'm Michelle Meow, your host. We're kind of a mix mosh of like everything, radio, television, and Ustream. So if you head to swirlradio.com, you can catch all of our great content there. So many have heard of the McMartin case, the huge daycare child abuse cases that caused widespread panic and hysteria. But many have not heard of Bernard Baran's case. He was the first daycare worker who was actually convicted, and he spent over 20 years not only in jail, but also being faithful to his innocence. On June 9th, 2009, all charges were finally dropped. Let's welcome Bernard to Swirl. Bernard?
Hi. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You were accused of molesting 6 children, 2 of which were children of the parents who accused you, or at least came up with the claim. Can you describe who the parents were and why you feel they accused you of these horrible crimes?
Well, in depositions later on, of course, we didn't know this then, but in depositions that we learned later that both of the parents were friends, and they both hated homosexuals. They openly admitted that gay males should not be working with children in a deposition, and that's what we found out later. So that's how this case started. This case did not start with an accusation of child molestation. It started with a complaint that they had a gay male working at a daycare center, and gays should not be working with children, and that was one of the parents.
And you came out at such an early age, to your mother. Were you always comfortable with being an out gay man?
I was comfortable with myself, but the environment in the of Berkshire County, which is in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, was a very bigoted county. So it was a struggle to be an outward gay man.
Absolutely. So do you feel that the parents and the teachers and police officials were working together to come up with a story that would stick?
I think what happened is with the first parent, who was also in deposition, we found out a drug addict, and her child had been taken away on numerous occasions for her own abuse to that child, and on other occasions, neglect. And the second parent that you're talking about, there was an accusation with a separate police department where that child was actually molested by the girl's, the parent's boyfriend, and they held that evidence from us because it was in another county, and they knew about it, but they withheld that evidence throughout my whole trial.
That makes me absolutely sick. I mean, obviously it begs the question: how can anyone convict you and believe, these parents who obviously seemed, not fit?
I think the sad part is we had a prosecutor who is now a judge, Daniel A. Ford, who was the prosecutor during this time. And, when I talk to people about the discrepancies and about the discrimination, I go back to grand jury. And in a grand jury, we are supposed to show what we have. The state is supposed to show evidence to us, the public, as they gained it. But they showed edited videotapes in my case to begin with, just to get the grand jury to indict me, taking hours and hours of videotapes and editing them down to 5 minutes, taking out parts where the children actually were saying that they did that. I never did anything to them, that I was a nice person, until they would bring 3 or 4 or 5 people into these interview rooms and try to get these children to say things. It was absolutely deplorable when we got to see the unedited videotapes. And they were not released to us until 2006. And the prosecutor that was on the case at the time had to pass away before the videotapes showed up through another prosecutor.
Wow.
Yeah.
That just makes me sick to my stomach that, all this information was withheld. Now, you were convicted you were only 19 years old, and we were showing photos of at the time, and so young, and then sentenced to life in prison. I think that was 2 terms in life in prison, correct?
Yes, it was 2 terms of life in prison and 5, 8 to 10-year sentences.
How did you keep your faith and maintain your innocence? How did you get through this at such a young age? I would think that you'd want to give up and just give in to whatever it is that they were offering you.
At the time, that's true. I mean, let's mention that to the listeners. I was offered a 5-year agreement if I was to plead guilty to everything. I was offered 5 years if I took that plea, and I was 19. But I was taught that, and I believed that I would be found innocent because I did not do these crimes. Little did I know that, the prosecutor at the time would go to such lengths, which is outlined very detailed in the appeal decision, because the state appealed my decision. So it's very outlined in the decision from the appeals court, and you can find that information on the NCRJ.
And do you think that, it was mentioned in also an article that I'd read that there wasn't enough sufficient physical evidence to suggest that you molested these, the children. Do you think that was the real basis or the conclusion of why these accusations were thrown out of court?
No, I actually think that the video, the accusations you mean now were why they were thrown out of court. I think that the appellate court, basically, when they upheld Judge Fecto's decision to release me, Judge Fecto released me on ineffective counsel. But when the appeals, of course, the state appealed. When it went to the appeals court wrote much more in depth of prosecutorial misconduct, of withholding evidence, of all the things when you read through my case are very easily to see. So I think what happened is you had a malice prosecutor at the time who is still a sitting judge, because in Massachusetts, all prosecutors have immunity, no matter what they are found to do or not do in cases. They have immunity in this state. We don't even give our president immunity, but in Massachusetts, we give our prosecutors immunity.
Oh man! Well, so I have so many. I have a lot more questions coming up. I want to talk about now where you're at and what the court has decided and how they've made good for you since they've taken away so much of your life. But we have to take a quick break. Will you stay with us?
I will.
Michelle Meow with Swirl Radio. We'll be right back.